Motorcycle Adventure Dirtbike TV is proudly supported by Adventure Spec in England, Rally Raid Products, Giant Loop in the United States, Adventure Moto and Adventure Rider Magazine in Australia.
For many riders throughout the world, there is nothing wrong with the standard suspension of the Yamaha T700. But we do know that the suspension is soft, and great improvements in handling and rider comfort on the bike can be made by simply going to a suspension specialist and at a relatively little cost installing the correct rear spring for the rider's weight. Adventure riders that have ready access to dirt and technical trails have discovered limitations to the standard suspension as they take the bike to its design limits. At the end of the day, this is not a 200 kilogram motocrosser, it's a dual sporter. But unfortunately, the fundamental handling of the bike in the dirt is outstanding, and the low down grunt of the engine makes it a hell of a lot of fun in the dirt, and so riders are pushing the bike hard on rougher trails. In recent months, and in response to rider demand, a large range of front and rear suspension systems are being marketed to improve the T700 suspension. Rally Raid Products UK have recently released a range of suspension products for the T700, including rally spec closed cartridge fork systems, which are expensive and do require regular maintenance. In recent months, in collaboration with Tractive Suspension, Rally Raid Products have developed an open cartridge fork system featuring a 35mm piston, significantly larger than the 20mm piston on standard forks. The benefits of an open cartridge system over a closed cartridge system is they are significantly cheaper and require lower maintenance. In this video, I'll be fitting and testing the Rally Raid Products open cartridge fork system and the Adventure shock. I would also like to mention that Rally Raid Products UK have been a long-time supporter of Mad TV, and over a number of years I've assisted with research and development of a number of Rally Raid products.
Christmas at Motorcycle Biz with Clive Ward.
New tools.
New tools. We're fitting the Rally Raid fork internals. I've got more springs there than on a trampoline. And we've got a shock to fit as well, so interesting day. So these are 35mm piston.
Complete cartridge.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
A whole lot, including adjustable preload. So there's two things happening to the black bike. We're fitting Rally Raid open cartridge internals to the front forks, and that's with the 35mm piston. And we're also fitting the Rally Raid T7 Adventure shock. It's got hydraulic preload, low speed and high speed compression, bigger piston, bigger shaft. So interesting times today for the black bike. Oh, there she goes. Hey! One of the best modifications you can make to this bike straight away, if you're over around 55 kilos, Clive says, is to get the correct rear spring for your weight. Nothing's changed. We're doing all this flash stuff today, but at the end of the day, that's what's important.
So that was the stock spring out of one, 6.7 kilo rating. Could not get static sag or rider sag with an 80 kilo rider, no load. It's probably really suited to someone 55 to 70 kilos. It's carrying no loads.
Midgets, Clubby. Midgets. It's not
I
you
don't
and
think
I.
qualify for the stock spring.
No, I don't either.
So that was your first change spring.
Yeah.
So that was a 9, I believe.
Yeah.
And now we're going to go to an 8.5.
But it's
this one.
yeah.
So just slightly softer, but it shouldn't make any difference really.
All right, let's see how we go. This is going to improve my quality of life.
We're going to check the sag. There's your static sag at 22. You'll jump on that, Clubby. Rider sag jumps in. 64. Within 1 mil. 64 mil rider sag, so that's within 1 mil. 65 is what you're looking for.
Dave would be a bit heavier than me, wouldn't he?
Oh, that is
Me.
outrageous. Bloody outrageous. All right, so we're in limits. Everything's good. Sag's right. And that's with no hydraulic preload on. So, yep, that's good. Got to be happy with that. Isn't that a nice black beauty? I like them in black, Clubby. I know you like the white and red, but I got to tell you, I love the black.
Boring in black is all I can say, Dave.
Oh, Gawley and I have got black. Craig Dack's got black.
All the fast guys have got black, yeah. Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah. All the fast pensioners. This is going to be interesting, Clive. We're putting these new fork internals in and you're going to chuck them on the dyno.
Yep, we'll see what they offer.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're going to lineage the forks.
Yeah.
So it might be hard for the camera to see in this light, but there's little marks and nicks and scrape lines that end up on the fork from the use.
Yeah.
And we want to remove all that. We want to leave a very fine finish on there so that the seals just glide across the surface and don't cause any friction or stiction.
Right. Those fine scratches. So what do the fine scratches do?
They're a crosshatch,
Yeah.
very similar to what you do with a cylinder bore, so the oil can sit in the very fine scratches
Yeah.
and create a surface that the seal will glide across.
Right.
And it's also removed any nicks or scratches or anything that's happened over time. So we're going to insert the cartridge. We've serviced the fork. Insert the cartridge all the way through. Cap on no spring and apply tighten the top here up. And we've got to flip it upside down and fill it with oil.
Is that usual to fill it upside down?
No, I just
Right.
read their instructions. That's the way they want it done.
Right. Okay. So you suspect because to bleed them, maybe.
Yeah, it says to fill it this way and bleed it. So we need 450 ml of oil.
Right.
That's got to go in through the bottom, and then we need to top up the outer tube afterwards before we put the spring in.
Oh. While out here the brain surgery's being undertaken and we're giving an intravenous injection at the moment. Oh, look at that.
We're drawing the oil out to get an oil height of 120 ml from the top.
Right.
So, forks bled, oil height set. We're ready to put the cap on and dyno it.
Here we go, Clive. I'm excited. Clive, tell me what's happening here.
Okay, well what we can see is you've got a large range of adjustment here.
Yeah.
So these are topping out at nearly 50 kilos of force.
They're the black lines, aren't they?
Yeah, so up the top here on your compression,
Yeah.
which is pretty much motocross level suspension, probably way stiffer than you're going to need it. So I've just pulled some clicks out of it and it's dropped down 10%. I still think we need to be down around here somewhere. But the rebound looks pretty much where we
Spot
want
on.
it. Yeah. Yeah. Big
So it's-
improvement over the stock.
So it's got a lot of adjustability.
Lots of adjustability so far, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
looks like you'll be able to make it as stiff as you want. Let's see if we can make it soft enough as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we'll do a couple
So
more
certainly
adjustments.
better than standard.
Oh yeah. The standard line are those little lines down the bottom.
Which ones?
That's the standard line here
Right.
and down here.
Right. Huge difference.
So big difference.
Huge difference. All right.
I'm going to test the suspension using two methods. Firstly, I'm going to ride the types of trails, roads and tracks that represent the usual type of terrain and conditions I cover. The second half of the test will involve repeatedly riding over short sections of track at speed that test the suspension's response to more extreme riding. However, I wish to point out that I am not seeking a 700 motocrosser. In my mind, it's very clear the type of suspension I'm looking for, and I can sum it up in a brief word picture. The first couple of centimetres of the suspension capable of absorbing those little imperfections in the road and not transfer them to the rider. I call this trail feel, and it is particularly important on long transport miles as hard suspension causes rider fatigue. I want to be able to maintain trail speed on rougher trails that include rocks, sharp-edged potholes and washouts. And I want to be able to take on the bigger hits, such as erosion mounds and whoops, and the unexpected without bottoming out the suspension with a crunch. Finally, I want the rear shock preload adjustable, so when I need to, I can take a load, be it a pillion or gear or both. A 2-hour ride from Clive's workshop to home on freeway and blacktop and a tootle down some country lanes confirmed the suspension was soaking up those minor imperfections on the road surface. I was pleased to discover this new suspension would not wear me out on those long haul miles.
Okay, so this little ring indicates how much suspension is being used. So what I'm going to do, we're just going on a normal trail. It's got a couple of potholes in it, and I'll put that rubber ring right up the top, and we'll see how much suspension is absorbed. You know, just going along on a trail, a typical dirt trail, a couple of, little shallow, sharp potholes and a few other things. And let's see how much suspension's used on that sort of terrain.
Onto trails with sharp potholes that we generally ride at a reasonable speed, and I notice a significant improvement in both the front and rear suspension. Most noticeable is the jarring has gone, that jarring you get when you hit a series of small potholes that have sharp lips. It's been noticeably reduced.
So here we are, back looking at the fork and looking at that ring and looking at how much distance there is there. It's, already, I'm quite surprised. There's only about another 30 millimetres of travel, maybe 40 millimetres of travel left in the fork. But it's funny, when you're hitting big G-outs and stuff, you'd swear that, the suspension was much firmer than that. I predicted that I'd only would have used that much suspension so far. But when you're on the bike, it's got this lovely feel and it soaks up the bumps, and that's exactly what it's doing. And it seems in that final bit that that's the bit that's controlled compression that, that gives you that feel of non-thudding, and it's very predictable. Yeah, it's quite amazing. I'm quite surprised how much suspension I've used just on that very, normal trail that we'd ride.
The next step was to take the bike on some tracks with relatively smooth erosion mounds that with the standard suspension were fun, but you had to be careful of bottoming it out. On these types of trails, I got my first glimpse of the improvement in handling that had been achieved with the new Rally Raid suspension. I found myself going progressively harder and faster, because the suspension was responding and soaking up those up ramps to the erosion mounds, and the landings were smooth and controlled. No falling through the stroke, no insufficient compression damping on the rear. The bike felt noticeably sure-footed and controlled.
Well, so after that series of whoops and that, not the biggest whoops I've hit so far, the suspension has nearly gone to its limit, but it doesn't feel like that when you're riding the bike. It just feels really, really sure-footed, and it's such a pleasure when you start moving. The faster you push the bike, the better it is, and yeah, I'm very impressed with that. Okay, the next bit of track, we get down here a bit further, and yeah, the erosion mounds get bigger, the potential for speed gets bigger. Just trying to get my head around these forks. They're basically, you know, they're using the full travel, even with the less difficult stuff, you know. Just when you start motoring, it's using those full range of the fork travel. And on this pretty smooth stuff, it still uses about that much travel. So this stuff, you know, gets soaked up really, really well.
The next piece of track has larger and steeper erosion mounds that are covered in sharp-edged rocks. The GoPro footage doesn't do this section of track justice. It's far more punishing on suspension than it looks.
In this dappled light, it's really hard to show you on video how rocky this trail is, and you know, it's just loaded with these sharp-edged large rocks and small stuff that, you know, have a potential to put you offline, test your suspension to the max, particularly when they're combined with large erosion mounds.
In these conditions, the improvements in suspension become even more obvious, as it easily copes with short, sharp edges of large rocks, as well as the erosion mounds.
Okay, let's go back to the suspension indicator, the little rubber ring, and it's just about, I think it's about, I don't know, half a centimetre off full extension. So, quite amazing how this bike not only soaks up the small stuff, but also the bigger stuff and the faster stuff and the more difficult terrain. Yeah, it's taking the suspension to another level. It's just so sure-footed, and you know, this suspension, you know, open cartridge and an improved rear shock, you know, it's not the most expensive suspension modification you could make, but from my experience of riding a whole range of different suspension setups, it's the best I've experienced so far. Those forks are just amazing. The rear end is amazing. What is putting me off with the rear end at the moment is the OEM center stand keeps banging. And the reason for that is I can just go faster and harder on more difficult terrain. So I think I'm going to have to get a little rubber band on that just to clip it up, because I love my centre stand. It's so useful in adventure riding. But yeah, so the bike has been transformed with this suspension, and you know, that's a big call. But I got to tell you, what I've taken it on today alone really proves to me that what John's managed to do with tractive suspension is brilliant, and Rally Road need to be congratulated. It's going to make a whole lot of T7 owners very happy, particularly those in the States, South Africa, and those places where we tend to ride a bit harder. Why do we ride harder? It's not because we've got more testosterone, it's just because we've got access to better trails and more difficult trails, and this is where this suspension comes to its strength.
Time to push the bike a little harder, and in close-up slow motion, give you the opportunity to see for yourself how the suspension is coping. The path I'm taking is littered with small gutters and washouts, some sharp-edged. One of the gutters, close to camera, is substantial, about 20 centimetres deep and close to 1 metre wide. On some runs, for the purposes of testing the suspension, and attempting to recreate that surprise hit, I'm pushing into those ruts when normally I would have lifted.
So as you can see from the slow-mo, I certainly pounded some of those undulations in there, and one so hard that you can see the rear wheel coming off the ground. But the point was to ride heavy and to try to push the bike into those bumps just to test out the suspension. What's interesting is the suspension has gone right to its limit on the front forks. That's the limit. There's about 30 mil that basically is the fork tube touching the top of the fork cap, but no sudden smashing of the fork tube into the top of the fork cap at all. I gave that suspension a fair hammering then, and yeah, I didn't feel any sharp bottoming it at all. It just came right to the end of its stroke in a very controlled way.
In the next example, I've picked a moderate sized erosion mound with an uphill landing. These are the types of obstacles that I find that I consistently bottomed out on with standard forks if I went too fast, and my only option was to slow down. With the Rally Raid suspension and its resistance to bottoming giving a linear compression, I once again have the confidence to take on this type of terrain at a higher and more satisfying speed.
Filming suspension is a real challenge. I mean, the side profile doesn't do this really justice. This is a typical erosion mound with a horrible ending down in the bottom there. And it doesn't matter which way you take it on the standard T7 suspension, that would end up with the fork tubes coming through and hitting the fork caps. And for those that have experienced it, it's not very pleasant. And yeah, can you imagine coming down here? You know, you can see it already. It's got a lip there. The lip's almost, half an ankle deep. It's got a horrible sharp lip on it. And this is what happens when you've got good suspension. These things don't become a worry anymore, and life becomes more pleasurable.
Going downhill into this erosion mound, which has a sharp face, is a greater test for the suspension. And it comes through with flying colours. There is no way in the world I would make that approach at that speed with the standard suspension. So let's get an idea of the speed I'm taking on this erosion mound. I'm not going flat out, but I am moving at a decent speed for the conditions. I'm coming to the conclusion that for my style and purpose of riding, this suspension setup is spot on. Here is some footage of the suspension close up and personal, taking on some of these conditions. It's clear to me from my testing of these suspension modifications that they have made a huge improvement to the handling of my bike, particularly in the more challenging dirt conditions at speed. It's ticked all the boxes. I can comfortably ride long dirt miles with the plushness of the suspension, but it's shown it can also take the big hits and allow me to maintain trail speed in those rougher sections. The open cartridge fork system surprised me with its performance that I would rate as very close to a closed cartridge system. And it has the additional benefits of a huge range in adjustability in compression and rebound damping, easy maintenance, and substantially lower cost than closed cartridge systems. I expected outstanding performance from the rear Adventure shock, and it didn't disappoint. This is a proven technology that is well established. There is significant adjustability both in low and high speed compression and rebound damping, and I found its performance close to perfect for my use. But after a discussion with John, I am going to slightly increase rebound damping up 3 clicks from standard. There is a heap of information in this video, and following this conclusion, there is an in-depth discussion with John Mitchinson of Rally Raid Products, some more slow motion video close-ups of the front and rear suspension working, and an embarrassing wrestle with my T700 in the mud. After testing this suspension, these are my suggestions to getting the best out of your T700 suspension for dirt-oriented adventure for a reasonable price. Start with ensuring static sag and rider sag measurements are within limits. If not, get the correct rear spring for your weight. This will make a huge difference in handling and rider comfort, and without doubt is the cheapest and most cost-effective thing you can do to improve your bike's suspension. If you find that occasionally you are bottoming out the forks on the trails you are riding, I would highly recommend installing the Rally Raid open cartridge fork system and keep your standard rear shock fitted with the correct spring for your weight. John and I discussed this combination further at length. From my experience of testing a range of suspension alternatives, this makes good sense, in that you will be getting a good bang for your buck and a significant improvement in the handling and poise of the bike. The other huge advantages to the open cartridge system is low maintenance and excellent adjustability for different riders, styles and conditions. There's no doubt you could spend more money on a top-of-the-range rear shock and or closed cartridge systems, and they will give you huge improvements in suspension. However, for most riders, that large cost is not necessary. At the end of the day, I'm riding adventure, not participating in a motocross race. John Mitchinson, welcome to Mad TV, and thanks for that suspension. I've had an absolute ball on that in the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, well, it's a big step up now from the standard suspension, even with the developments we did to that. So it's nice that you can get a feel for all the work we've done the last 18 months with the bike, because we had the bike here a bit earlier than you.
Yeah, I'd just like to congratulate you on the fork, John. Like, you know, the viewers are going to see that video, and this interview will be at the end of that video. But the slow motion shots and you know, where I'm just hitting these quite significant bumps and it's just not falling through the stroke. It's a very progressive feel right to the end, but it's so subtle. Like it soaks up the small stuff and it soaks up the big stuff, and it's amazingly agile in the way it does that. And I look forward to talking to you about that tonight. Well, John, it's been a cracking couple of weeks testing your new suspension. Please tell me the secret to this fork. It's just fantastic.
The main difference between our open cartridge and the Yamaha open cartridge is the diameter of the piston. It's now 35 millimeters in diameter rather than the standard 20, which with that extra surface area, it means you can flow the oil at lower speed and have much more progressive damping. It also means that we can redesign it so that we've got a much more progressive PDS, which for most people that they wouldn't know what that is, but it's what governs the last sort of 20 or 30 millimeters of your travel, so that when you normally bottom a fork out, you don't want that metal to metal bang, bang, bang. So what we've done is redesigned the PDS, so it's much more progressive. It's a proper hydraulic check valve, so that it really does ramp up the hydraulic pressure internally, and it takes the pressure off the spring so that it slows it down really progressively. So you shouldn't get any bottoming, and if you do, it wouldn't hardly be noticeable to you.
Yeah, it's quite amazing. I mean, I specifically went out to test that, and you'll see like there's a couple of erosion mounds that have up-facing exit points, or they've got a nice little ditch at the end of it, specifically designed by me to really test out that suspension, because the standard T7, you would have your fork tubes hitting you in the teeth.
Yeah.
On some of those obstacles that I've put in the video, and I'm not noticing that. So brilliant job. I've really pushed those forks to the limit, particularly with that rubber ring indicator. Like I've certainly taken them. I've taken them right to the end.
Yeah. All our fork kits we send out with an O-ring that you can slip over the right hand leg on the chrome part of the tube, So it means before you go out riding, just slide it right up to the top. And then when you get back from a ride, you can measure it, put the bike on the center stand or the side stand and pull the forks up to full extension and just take a measurement. And you'll know exactly how much of the 200mm travel that you've used on the front fork.
John, one of the other things I noticed, and you, again, using that ring to make some observations, was that I was riding on a fairly simple trail, and it had, you know, reasonable undulations in it, but nothing like erosion mounds, and it still used about this much of the fork travel. And then what happens is when I go into the harder stuff and I'm really pushing it hard and the erosion mounds, it just extends that ever so slightly. So for the little stuff, it's moving really quickly and soft and plush. But when it comes to the big stuff, it just scales up. Is that the way of looking at it?
Yeah, that's the whole trick of using the bigger piston, that you can flow the oil at lower speed for the small bumps, so you get a very good progressive, supple ride over the small stuff. But then you don't bottom out over the big stuff because you've got a really good PDS and a much better shim stack. It's bigger diameter, because that was the problem when I was trying to sort of develop the OEM cartridge. I could pretty much either get it to work over the small stuff nice, but then it would bottom out on the big hits, or you could get it to sort of not bottom out on the big hits, but then it would be too harsh on the small stuff. And it all sort of came back to the 20mm piston, because for a big plus 200 kilo plus motorcycle, they're pretty standard size pistons that you would get in a much smaller bike. So the 35mm piston is something that we developed for the closed cartridge fork kit for the Africa Twin, really, by Tractive. It's the biggest one in the marketplace. So we very easily then transferred the closed cartridge from the Africa Twin to the T7. That was one of the first things we did. And that really is a really, really good ride. But for most adventure riders, they probably wouldn't get the full benefit of the closed cartridge, and it's a lot more expensive, and there's more precise servicing needed. It's got a gas pressurized system in there, more like a shock. So you need to go to a specialist suspension tuner to service it. Whereas I wanted to sort of progress the open cartridge, but I realized that I'd come to a sort of dead end with the OEM cartridge. So it seemed a sort of logical thing for me to do, was to try and convert the closed cartridge with the 35mm piston into an open cartridge, which is something that Tractive haven't ever done before. They've always just done high-end closed cartridge. So it was something that I did off my own back, and straight away, within a week, you know, I'd got a much better ride, even with the base settings from the first open cartridge, than I had with developing 6 months with the OEM Yamaha cartridge.
Yeah, no, I've been part of your R&D, and it's been an inspiration to watch, you know, and you've certainly nailed it this time. It's interesting from my perspective, you know, I'm a dirt rider by trade, and that's my background, and then came into adventure riding. So I have a tendency to ride adventure bikes probably a little bit quicker than most. What I've found for me is that open cartridge system is ideal for me for adventure riding. It's perfect. I have ridden closed cartridge systems, and I understand and appreciate that they give a greater performance. But for me, for adventure riding, this is perfect, John. It really does, fits the bill. Yeah.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I mean, there's a place for closed cartridge. We used it in the Africa Twin when we raced that. We did some rallies on it, and we still have the closed cartridge in our rally bikes, because you are looking for high-end performance, and, you know, cost is not so critical. But for most adventure riders, you know, we're trying to come up with a package where you've got nearly the same performance as the closed cartridge, but at a much lower cost, and more importantly, much easier to service. It's an open cartridge, so most end guys that have had a KTM EXC or a 690 would probably be able to work their way around it. Yeah, we're trying to come up with a solution that's really would cover the majority of the riders rather than the minority.
Yeah, well, you've certainly done that. John, the suspension that you sent out to me had preload adjusters for the fork caps. Does that come standard with the open cartridge system?
It does, yeah. The open cartridge is a complete system. You just remove the Yamaha internals, including the fork caps, including the fork springs, and replace it with our open cartridge, which has an adjustable preload cap. So you've got 10 millimeters of adjustment. Plus we also send out plastic spacers, so you can add up to another 10 millimeters of fixed preload. So that pretty much covers most riders' weight differences with luggage. And we also have a full range of springs for the open cartridge as well. So we can pretty much tailor it to suit the rider's weight, passenger, luggage, and even the riding style. You get some people are going to be more road orientated. They'd probably want a slightly stiffer fork that it sits up in the stroke for the road. But then you get the guys that are going to be doing the more of the riding like you're doing, washed out tracks, and you want a much more supple initial movement to the bike, but then you also don't want it to bottom out.
Yeah, and that was another thing that was really interesting. Like you can change your compression and rebound damping on the tops of the forks through the fork caps.
That's right.
And when Clive put the forks on the dyno, one of the other tremendously beneficial features is the adjustability. When we first tested them on the dyno, Clive described them at that particular setting was like motocross performance in terms of shocks. Now I've eased that back quite considerably, but what it does is it allows riders of different tastes to vary those qualities in the fork.
Yeah, with the OEM fork, you've got your compression adjustment in the bottom of the fork leg and rebound in the top. So each fork leg shares rebound and compression, whereas we've swapped them completely. So you've got one leg for rebound, one leg for compression. And that means we don't have to compromise on the settings. And also you get a much wider range of adjustment. By having them combined, like the OEM, you haven't really got the range of adjustment. So that's why, like I said, put it on the dyno, you can go from sort of motocross setting to a road setting with just a few clicks.
Yeah, it was amazing how quick. That was the other thing too. Like Clive understood what I wanted, and we basically dialed the forks in from the dyno, and I'm really happy with those settings. Yeah, so brilliant. Got to talk about this rear shock. So tell me about that, because that's been fantastic on the back as well. It doesn't fall through the stroke. You've got a good rear shock when you're not feeling it hitting you in the backside and or falling through, and it's brilliant.
Yeah, again, that's using the rally technology we've used with Tractive over the years for the rally bikes. So they use a twin piston shock body. So you've got the main larger piston that deals with the smaller, more supple bumps. And then when you get the really high hits where it's going to blow through the stroke, you've got a secondary piston that comes into play into a tapered chamber. And again, the idea of this is it takes the pressure off the spring and off the main shim stack. So what it means is you can shim the bike and tailor the main piston for the nice plush ride without worrying that the last sort of 30-40 mil of rear wheel movement is going to collapse through and bottom out, because you've got this secondary piston to back up the hydraulics. So again, you can get that sweet spot of having a smooth start to the shock action without having a bottoming out crisis when you're landing on stuff hard.
Yeah, when we had a discussion off air, probably a couple of weeks ago now, one of the things you suggested to me was just to click up the rebound damping at the base of the fork. I haven't done that yet. because I've been so impressed with the forks. I've just been getting my head around those. But I think that's one thing I'll do. And again, there is so much adjustment in the rear shock. And I'm sure I just need probably 2 or 3 clicks on the rebound just every now and again, you'll see in the slow motion, there's one particular thing I hit. Well, it's a foot deep and it's sharp edged, and I've just hit it, and the rear wheel comes up a bit. And look, I'll be frank, I was riding heavy and pushing down the front to test the forks out, and I may have just lifted my legs up and it came up. So I'm going to fiddle with that, but I've got to say I'm really impressed with that rear shock. I think it's brilliant.
Yeah, rebounds are most people tend to concentrate on the shock, on bottoming out and compression, but you'd be amazed that rebound on the shock, you get more grip out the corner. You don't get that tramping of the rear wheel. So
Yes.
You really want to run your rebound as slow as you can, with as much rebound as you can.
Yes.
Dialed in, because it slows down the tramping of the rear wheel. You don't, when you hit something, the back of the bike's not going to try and come over your head.
Yeah.
And eventually you just keep winding it in until you realize that it's packing out. When you get a succession of smaller or larger bumps in a row, if you've got too much rebound, it can't go back to its full extension in time. So you'll feel it packing. But most of the bikes that I ride, the T7s, they're generally set up pretty well on compression, but most of them, people don't have enough rebound dialed in, and they'll always say, if they're riding my bike, how well it hooks up out the corners in the sand going.
Yeah, you'll see, the viewers will see in the slow motion here that very thing you're talking about with those, undulations, multiple undulations, about this deep. You can see the back wheel, it's just tracking on those perfectly. It's very, very close. If it's not perfect, it's very, very close. It's
yeah, I mean, the whole point of getting the shock and the fork set up is so the wheels don't leave the ground. You want the bike to remain static and the wheels to be doing their thing. So that my idea of a good shock setup is you don't actually think about it. You just ride the bike.
Yes.
And that's if I've got the bike set up well, you come back from a day's riding and you realise you haven't thought about the suspension all day. You've just concentrated on putting the bike where you want it, and it does it.
Yeah, that comment struck a chord with me. I guess I've just come back from, I've still got that after effect of coming from standard suspension to the rally raid, and I'm still in that comparison mode, but I really enjoyed testing the bike and pushing the limits of the suspension, because the bike fundamentally handles brilliantly, and it's just the suspension just needs. Going back to the rear shock, the Rally Raid rear shock, the Adventure shock that I have, has hydraulic preload, doesn't it?
Yeah. So most of our twin piston shocks, we try and put the hydraulic preload adjuster on there because it's just for convenience.
Yes.
A lot of bikes still have the old threaded nut and lock nut, but to be honest, most people, once they've set it, they just can't be bothered to change it. So they don't really get the benefit. So you either end up having a bike that handles nicely solo, but then if you've got a passenger and luggage, it's wallowing a bit.
Yeah.
Or the opposite, you set it up for a passenger and luggage, and then if you're on their own, if you're riding on your own, it's a bit of a rough ride. So the hydraulic preloader it's a convenience, really, and it's well worth it. It's something we sell a lot of for the other bikes for convenience.
So let's go to suspension setup. So I've got the open cartridge and the Adventure shock. But, I was thinking, if I was a budget conscious person and I wanted to get the best bang for my buck with as little money, would I be right in thinking, get the rear suspension done, the rear shock, and get the open cartridge 35mm forks?
Yeah, I think that's the best value for money, I think, is get the correct spring fitted to the OEM shock.
Yeah.
That gets you ride balance, that gets the bike level, and then go for the open cartridge, because there's much more of a perceived benefit from the fork than the shock.
Yes.
And you would definitely feel the advantages of the open cartridge fork straight away.
Yeah, I mean, it was distracting to me, John. It was so good that it took me about a half a day to start thinking about the rear suspension, because the front had improved so much. Yeah,
it does. It just makes the bike a pleasure to ride, and you then don't have to worry too much about, you know, what tyre you've got on. It copes well with different terrain. If you want to jump short on something and land on the face of something, like you say, instead of the standard forks feel like they're coming out with the fork caps, it just soaks it all up.
I hate that feeling. I went for a ride with Nugget the other day, and honestly, it happened to me 4 times on the one ride. It was in a quite a rugged place, and we were skipping along, and it's just unpleasant. Yeah,
it's not a nice. It's funny actually, because now I've ridden and developed our bike for 18 months. If I'm out on a ride and then somebody wants to have a spin on our bike, I ride the standard bike, and it's a real shock, because you forget how far you've come from the standard shock, because going out every weekend doing incremental changes, you sort of lose sight of where you started from. So it's a real shock for me to get back on a standard bike, and you do realise how much they pitch and bottom.
Yeah, it's you know, I've been with you on a little bit of this journey for the R&D, and you know, when you're experimenting with a 20 millimeter fork cartridge, you know, and the effort that you put into that, but you know, just taking that to the 35 mil, it's just taking it to another level. But we could rabbit on about that all day. I'm still got that halo effect of how good it is. And yeah, the thing I just feel with my bike now is that it's just so well sorted and planted. Like, you know, I've just finished the review. You know, I've been riding it on long miles, and it soaks up the small stuff, so there's no rider fatigue with that. I go and I start pushing it a little bit harder, and it just takes that, and it's very confidence inspiring, like the whole setup. And yeah, I'm to the stage, like you say, that I'm not going to be thinking about suspension and just enjoying it. And but the final bit is those that erosion mound, that the tricky one that I've got for filming here. You know, after the 10th time over that, and just thinking how good this is and how much fun it is. You know, it's nothing better than opening up that very grunty engine, you know, and putting it under a bit of pace, because the handling is so good. So, mate, once again, congratulations, John Mitchinson from Rally Road Products. Thanks for being with us tonight, and this will form part of the review. Yeah,
that's all right. Thanks a lot, Dave, and nice to get some feedback from Australia.
Yeah, mate. Yeah, it's I'm looking forward to. We're going to do a suspension comparison soon with a couple of other different products, and I'm really looking forward to Clubby riding this, because I've ridden his bike and I know what that's like, and I think it's going to blow his mind.
Good.
Okay, mate.
Righto. Thanks a lot.
These moments where this could turn horribly pear-shaped. Oh well, against my better judgment. And it did. Fuck it. I've got to get this out before it has suction. A lesson, folks. Don't take big shitters in the mud. All right. Once you get down in the hole. Oh boy. Oh my God. We still got to get out of here.